Kia ora tātou, and welcome to this briefing on local water done well. We'll be discussing the options that will be going out for public consultation, and we'll be acknowledging also some of the work that's already gone on in this space. I'd like to, before we kick off, particularly acknowledge the work that was done in the Wellington region, chaired by Kerry Prendergast, with able assistance from Dougal List, and some excellent work gone on there. But that is not part of the options that we'll be considering due to the financial challenges that we saw into the future for our council should we go into a water entity with the Wellington region. I just thought I'd preface with that and just acknowledge that we were fully engaged in that space, and that decision was made after careful analysis and consideration. So that's why we've ended up with the options that we have in front of us today. So I'll now pass over to staff. We'll play it by ear as to whether we have questions as we go along. If they're not urgent questions, just press your button and just hold until we can find a good place to pause. This is one of the most important decisions that we'll make during our term as councillors, because water is one of the most important services we deliver, and this sets us up for the future. So with that, I'll pass over to staff and we'll get underway with the presentation. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just reaffirming, this is the last briefing before we bring a paper to you on the 6th of March, which will confirm the consultation document and the process associated with that in terms of moving forward. And so Martin's, we've done some further work since the last briefing on some feedback we had from that work, and there's also been a little bit of work going on with the northern sort of working group, if you want to call that. We're part of, obviously, that Whenua, Manawatu, Palmerston North group that are working on options at the moment. So there's been some work done there around some of the financials. So there's a little bit of an update there, but Martin will take you all through that. And again, we do have an hour, but I'm not sure if there's anything after this meeting. So we might have time if things do stretch on a bit to go over that, but we'll try and stick to that.
I think we should just take as much time as we need. Yeah. And whatever comes next will come when it comes. Okay?
Okay, thank you. And kia ora koutou, I'm Martin Cole, just here to support the Local Water Done Well work program and to give you an update on further developments of the work that's been going on. So just there's quite a lot of work going on the consultation document itself. It's coming up to about 26 odd pages worth, just to give you an idea of the volume of information that's going to be coming through with that consultation. We'll give you an overview of the key approaches in that document. There were some questions last time in the briefing about the drivers for change to go to a CCO, so we just want to pick up on a couple of those. What were the challenges being faced perhaps by others, and where Kapiti is positioned currently. Some further work on the financials that's being done on the for council option, and just picking up from the sentiment and the thinking around how to address standing orders going forward. We've done a bit of piece of work on that and positioned that in the consultation document. I'll walk you through that for questions, and then a bit more about the communications and the next steps from there. So what we heard was that coming in from Christmas was to look at three options. The one council internal business unit with Kapiti Coast as an internal business unit. There was another option with Kapiti and Whenua, which was a CCO model or a joint water services organisation with Whenua, and a further model which was four council CCO, which was Whenua, Manawatu, Palmerston North and Kapiti. So what we heard was that and what we've seen is that the larger CCO option provides greater economies of scale and benefit. So we've dropped the Whenua option in terms of it didn't meet all the benefits that a four council option could provide. So what we've put in the consultation document is two options, which is the minimum requirement under the alternative requirements in the legislation, with the Kapiti Internal Business Unit being the proposed or preferred option presented to the community. That's how that's being positioned in the consultation document.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to check in and just double check that that's where everybody understood we got to at the end of the last briefing, that we were, if I remember we said if we have to go to 3 options, then we will, if that legislation requires that, but if not, then the 2 options. Is that what everybody understood to be the position? Yep, great. Thanks, Madam.
Good. Good to get that clarity again. So with those 2 options in mind, we've refined the framework based on what's important to Kapiti, and picked out those 6 priorities, if you like, in terms of public ownership. The ownership of the water assets must remain in public ownership, financially stable and affordable, fair and transparent charging for customers, safe and reliable water services as a given, efficient and effective, also translating local priorities through to the water service delivery entity, however that is, must recognise the local priorities, but also build on the work that's been done to date to bring Kapiti to where it is in its water services and provide for growth. Acknowledging mana whenua aspirations and concepts have meaning and influence in the management of water is also a key factor. And ultimately, our water organisation has resilience, remains strong and functional in all circumstances. So we've positioned those as the priorities, if you like, to underpin the decision in terms of the consultation. And just a snapshot assessment, if you like, following on from the earlier work about how those are viewed against the 2 options. Public ownership is embedded in the proposed legislation, and there are protections against privatisation in that legislation. And additionally, you have the Commerce Commission also looking over that. So public ownership is relevant for both, although in the for council CCO, that would be through council owning shares in a shareholder council that would then own the limited liability company. Safe and reliable water services would be regulated, remain regulated with Te Mata ROI and the Commerce Commission. So we see those both as green. Mana whenua in the existing internal business unit maintains its relationships and those connections with council and that strategic governance level, whereas there is yet to be decisions made and conversations had in the for council option about where mana whenua would sit within that organisation and how they would feed in to provide input. Financially, the internal business unit provides the lowest cost option for around 20 years based on the modelling that we're seeing, and is financially sustainable, whereas the for council option has higher short-term and medium costs, and I'll show you projections of those based on the modelling, but again, it's financially sustainable in the longer term. Local priorities, obviously with a council-owned IBU, is directly connected to council priority setting, whereas a full council organisation has to take account of all the priorities of the shareholder councils and then decide on what it tells the entity its priorities are overall. So that would be setting those collectively as a priority with a statement of expectation to the organisation. Then looking at resilience, and this is largely based on scale. With a larger organisation, greater width and depth of expertise, the larger CCO can hold perhaps more resilience, whereas there are some vulnerabilities with being a smaller organisation. Last time we met, we talked a bit about the drivers for change. What's the driver for change? Why would people be considering CCOs, and perhaps where Kapiti's position is currently? So availability of debt funding is a key issue here, in that there are councils that are challenged with insufficient funding capacity to deliver both water services and the council aspirations for investment within the existing local government funding agency lending covenants. Whereas Kapiti's position in terms of our long-term plan, has a plan to reduce debt and has headroom for future planned water services and council investment within the existing limits. Overall financial sustainability, there were questions and concerns in terms of an in-house business unit failing to meet the legislative requirement of financial sustainability by some councils, although Kapiti can demonstrate financial sustainability of an in-house business unit. So these are drivers as to some of the considerations as to why other organisations are looking to go to a CCO. And the other one that underpins that is affordability. So the cost of investment required would increase customer pricing, and we could perhaps show you what that would look like with the CCO model next. Whereas Kapiti can maintain the lowest cost option from the modelling we've done for the next 20 years or so, operating within its debt capacity. In terms of a financial update, we've been doing a bit more work in the background with Morrison Lowe, who are providing independent advice on the financial modelling of the options. We've done a bit of work on aligning some of those base assumptions sitting in the model, making sure that all four councils are comparing apples with apples and that the capital programs have had a good look over, so that we're confident that those are the commitments and the investments that are proposed. There's been more work done on the cost of setting up and transition and additional operating costs for a new CCO. Previously it was more of a top-down, but this is more of a bottom-up approach, providing more information around those. The costs have been presented in inflated figures, so these will be slightly different to what you've seen previously, but the differentials still present the same. And a new concept that's been introduced is price harmonisation over a period of time, and I'll talk a bit more about that when we get onto the cost slide. At the bottom there, you'll just see the projections in the modelling. If Kapiti was to stay alone as an in-house business unit, average cost to customer, again, it's not pricing because we've got water meters and other ways of pricing for water. The average cost was just around $2,000 in 2033, and that goes up to $2,700 in 2053. For the four council entity, that comes out at 10 years down the track at 2,600, which is about 640 above Kapiti's modelled numbers. And in the longer term, out to the 2050, that comes down to around 2,600, about 150 below. That's long-term projections, and there's a lot of sensitivity analysis in those numbers. But I guess in the short to medium term, there is quite a differential for Kapiti.
Yep, that's a good point to.
Yeah, could I just check in, the cost per customer, is that per rating unit or per head of population?
Per rating unit, yeah.
Per rating unit?
Per
Right.
connection to the network, yes. Per
Yeah,
rating.
yeah. Okay, and presumably that's factored in population increase of some description?
That's in the modelling, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I had a question. When you talk about the model where the council is the shareholder,
Yes.
is there any provision for council to be able to sell any of those shares?
So that's a level of detail that hasn't been.
Somebody needs to look at that. It's really important, because if the answer to that is yes, then it's an entirely different conversation.
I'm pretty sure. I'm sure that the ledge requires that the shareholders must be councils.
Yeah. In some legislation, and we saw that in the energy sector, it was that you had to be the majority shareholder, not the entire shareholder. So privatising 49% of your water, if that's a possibility. So it's something that I think would be really handy to know when you're adopting a model.
Yeah, so the provision today, as far as I'm aware, is they are solely and wholly owned by whatever council is that participating member. Certainly Wellington Water, when that was set up that was the case, and you couldn't sell those shares. I'm not sure in terms of any value they actually had, but it was just it was a way of establishing a split in terms of ownership. But
Yeah.
we can reconfirm and let you know. But that's a key part of the third bill and even some of the second bill around locking in public ownership.
Because as you know, there have been plenty of opportunities for and examples of where people have actually sold shares below the original market capitalisation. So I would just like to see something that says these are the rules, that this is going to be public ownership 100% forever, or not, depending on what that legislation is. But I think it's really important that we know what that is, because there will be significant disquiet about the potential to sell shares.
Yeah, that sits in Bill 3, so it's not legislation currently. So we've got the Preliminary Arrangements Act, which is Bill 2, if you like. So Bill 3 has very strong ownership requirements in it, that it's, as Sean said, council-owned or consumer trust-owned for the sole purpose of providing water services. And there's no franchising or concession arrangements with that as well. So there's some pretty strong protections in there in the legislation as the bill's drafted.
So, Councillor Wilson, you might like to Google water entities ownership shares, and I just did that, and it says that the shares cannot be sold or transferred, and they're owned by councils.
That's sitting in the bill at the moment. That's that provision. Sorry, I thought you were questioning the representation of shareholdings within the councils. No, it's councils or consumer trust, however you set that up. That's pretty clear.
Jocelyn, so just keep any questions to the slides that we've had so far. If there's any general questions, keep them to the end.
Thank you, Janet. So first of all, apologies for lateness. If I realised questions were being taken earlier per slide, I would have gone back to slide 6.
Yeah, I explained it at the start.
Yeah, thank you.
When you weren't here.
So slide 6 talks about the drivers to change, and specifically I'm looking at availability, available debt funding, and it says that company has a plan to reduce its debt. So I think it would be really good to understand what that is, because that might mean that we, even though if we go potentially with this model, we might be paying other ways to actually.
Ian might, but the finance strategy.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, which is locked into the LTP, actually sets that structure in terms of repaying debt.
Are you saying that we should have a link
something
to
else.
the financial strategy in the consultation document?
Well, what I'm saying is that if I ask that question, other people want to know exactly what that plan is.
So do we have a reference to our financial strategy in the consultation document? Let's just double check that. Thanks. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, there will be, and there will be financial projections that will reconcile to the LTP effectively. So there are some adjustments coming out of the work that's been done, but essentially it's referring to that LTP strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Just for thanks, guys. Just for context, so this is 2033 to 34. What are we actually paying at the moment as a component of the water and the rates? Is it?
I think it's about $1,500 if you sum them all up. It was on one of the previous slides.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I've just missed it.
Yeah,
I apologise.
it was in that order.
Okay, so around about 1,500.
It should be on.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So that's coming up.
Thank you. Just for some context, that's all.
Just in around there. So
Oh, there you go.
yeah, so currently that's the average. So on this slide,
16.
sorry, were there any other questions on the previous slide?
No, that's fine, thanks.
Okay, we'll just
So
take
that's
Martin's question and then we'll move on with the slides.
Yeah, just some quick clarity there, actually coming back to what Nigel was talking about. A CCO, is that a limited liability business?
It's in the proposed bill. It's a limited liability company.
Okay, that's cool. No, because it's just a limited liability company obviously has a shareholding made up of and can potentially be changed further on down the track. And I was wondering whether a CCO is different from a limited liability company with regards to what you can and can't do with it. In other words, that's why we're looking at a CCO versus a limited liability company.
So,
Yeah.
a little bit outside my expertise, but it is different. It's a council-controlled organisation has
Yeah.
specific requirements around it, so it's different to a standard.
So we're not talking about a limited liability company and the standard, what would be presumed to be.
It is a limited liability company, but it must be owned by councils. That's the
Yep.
point.
Okay. All right. So that's it. Okay. Just making sure that tie-in is there because what you're saying, who knows what the future holds, and I guarantee there's going to be questions coming up saying, well, hang on, it's been geared up to be moved on further on down the track. So it's important that we have that clarity there as well. The other one for me as well is just that chart that we've got here. I was just thinking about it this morning. We had this presented to us at TWOC. But I was wondering if it's just for relevance, whether it would be prudent to have the what the Wellington water entity was going to cost on that. I know it's not relevant in regards to the decision we're making. We've already made that decision. But there's a significant difference between what Wellington was going to, and it just perhaps gives our community context of the reason why we stepped out of Wellington and are looking at the proposals that we are looking at now. Sort of stuff, because I think it was around $4,500 or something along that sort of line. Yes, way the hell up there. But it just gives people a bit of a context of how we sit in the regional hierarchy, if you like, what we're looking at.
I guess the only issue with that, I don't know where they've got to in terms of the work they've done since we exited. What might that look like in terms of harmonisation? Martin will talk to you about that in a minute. There's other work happening. So at that point in time, that decision was made.
Yep.
I mean, there is a lot of information in the consultation document, so trying to keep it as uncomplicated as we can. But we could have a look. We could maybe have a note that flags, when that decision was made. But again, things have moved on.
There's a
whole
paragraph on it in the consultation.
It talks about exiting, yeah.
Yep, that's fine. As long as there's something, I just thought that would be quite good there. But that's fine. I just wanted to bring that up. That's cool.
Well, maybe it's in my blurb, but I saw something, because that's the only bit I've seen.
I think there's just a brief bit at the back about the discounted options. So there is a couple of paragraphs around that option.
it does explain it, but I'm not sure it gives the number because we'd have to expand the size of that chart to put it on because it's off the top. So I guess to drive the point home, I guess the way it's been treated in the consultation document is the council has been through a number of decisions to get to this, and by eliminating, and it'll be available in the decision that back in November, I think it was, where the it was quite clearly there was a differential that was not palatable. So this chart shows the modelled average household charges over the next 30 years. The Kapiti in-house base case, which is the mustard one here, the mustard line, is the projected costs for staying in-house. And there's a lift over the first 3 years as regulation starts to bite, the new regulatory regime of Commerce Commission and Tomato ROI. There's a lift in there. These are inflated numbers, so that you'll see the inflation effect there. This is the point at which the start of any new entity is likely to happen. Now, it's not legislated that timing, but that's certainly the timing that starts to look practical. And from there, we've also got on here, we've got Horowhenua up here, got Palmerston North as the green line, and Kapiti and Manawatu are the two lines tracking very similar together. So you can see in terms of bringing an entity together, and if we put it all together and had one price from day one, that's the red line, that's what that would look like. So you can see that the Kapiti in-house base case continues to stay lower for up to around 24 years. There is work going on in the concept of cost to serve, so community shouldn't pay more for its services other than the cost to serve, so taking some advantage from the scale if you were to go to 4CCO, but maintaining the price point where it sits for the work that's being done in the different locations, which means that the Horowhenua and Palmerston would still remain higher for longer, and Kapiti would stay lower for longer. And depends which point you take. If you harmonise those prices from year 7, these are the numbers that you end up with in the table, but you'd end up with a sharp increase up in here to come up to that average price. Conversely, leave it for longer, out to 20 years, when the pricing or the modelling shows that it naturally harmonises together. That also comes with its own challenges, because you've got councils in that entity that would be looking to see some of the benefits from joining together, obviously, and bringing their rates down and Kapiti up. So there's a piece of work happening at the moment, acknowledging the difference between the cost for Kapiti and Manawatu and the others being quite a differential.
Yeah, so just on that, if you recall the Wellington model, that was one of the key things that hadn't been done at the time when we had those conversations with Dougal and the working group there, but it was a key thing that they were looking at to try and keep the individual costs for each council the same for a period of time. And whatever that period of time looked like really depended on how much investment was going on and who was actually putting more money in and who was sitting below the line in terms of investment. And I'm not sure where they got to, but that work is there's a lot of activity in that space within the Horowhenua Palmerston North Kapiti group to see what does that look like. Obviously, the further you push it out, the longer those other councils have to wear the extra cost, and the better it is for Manawatu, obviously, and for Kapiti. But that's one way of trying to minimise the cost increase for a certain period of time that is being looked at the moment as a way of trying to minimise that impact. But obviously you don't have a lot of control over that process after you've set the CCO up. There may be some mechanism that you could use to try and lock that in for a period of time, but it would be very difficult. And the other issue there is that you can't go back, obviously. You know, if that harmonisation changes sooner rather than later, then there's no exiting, in theory, to go back to Kapiti in-house business unit. So it is, but there's a lot of work going on at the moment, trying to see if that is something that would be workable, and what that looks like from a functional sort of CCO focus.
Yeah, so there's a number of options, harmonising within 10 years, harmonising 20 years out, and obviously they have different implications for different councils.
Right. Jocelyn?
Yeah, thanks. So thank you. So I like this graph. It sort of shows lots of information, but just to clarify, so when it says that the Horowhenua District Council, that line represents, like it does with those other 3 baselines, or 4 baselines, what it would be if Horowhenua, for example, went into this, went alone. Is that correct? Okay. All right, that's good.
Yeah, it's each of the 4 base cases,
Yes.
and then the comparative joined up model.
Okay, and I think just to, it's probably good to make that very clear. The other thing I think would be really quite useful is on the slide before, it shows basically the cost to each household from 2033 to then 2053 to actually say what the total cost would be for the base of KCDC and the 4 entity group. So obviously every year, so like obviously it goes up, but over time there's going to be a big difference in the amount of money ratepayers pay over time, if you get what I mean. So if you add them all up, yes,
Cumulative
exactly,
total
exactly.
in between
Yes.
years 20 and year
Yes.
30.
Yes, that would be, particularly if you just look at those lines, you can see it's going to be a big difference. So to reiterate that point as well, that makes sense. I think Sean understands. what I
Yeah,
mean.
you could, yes. So that,
I do too.
I don't know what yeah, so
It's
you
just a
would
case
have
of adding up each of those things.
$300 times 10. I mean, probably not a huge, but
Well-
definitely have a look at it.
Yeah, well, because you look at, if you look at, particularly in 2033 and 2036, there's a big difference between KCDC and
Because it comes back down, right.
the 4 entity thing. And so, those things will, as you said, they'll accumulate quite a big difference in payments over.
I think people
over
are able
time.
to make that analysis by looking.
But if you
know.
see the numbers, though, I think it actually really lands it far better.
Well,
You know,
people
just as
can
a
look at
separate-
it
just
as
as
a
a
yearly
separate
rate
line,
or as a
just a-
cumulative rate, however they want to.
just as a set of words, you know, just a little table or a set of words or something.
There is supporting this the financial modelling report,
Oh, okay.
which is a deep dive to say that it has all these numbers, all the different combinations
Right, okay.
and permutations in it, and it's like 4 or 5 pages of
Yes.
the specific numbers to try and
Some
pull that
people
out.
won't
But
dive
to be
into
able-
that, though.
Yeah, I think
pull
because
that different-
the
I
challenge is to
think- I
try and
think- I
present
think
just the
you-
basic
yeah.
information without trying to
Okay.
skew.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because we're not supporting
yeah.
a movement in either direction. So if you want to sum up the total, and then you're welcome to do that. But we're just trying to be reasonably
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
transparent with
yeah,
the
we're-
total.
we're presenting a neutral case, right? We're not.
Well, it's
Trying
just
to
adding
sway
up, and
things
that's,
one
you know,
way or
you're
the other.
providing the facts.
I
in a slightly
think
different way.
the point's well made, and
Yep.
we've heard it, and we'll
Yep.
take it into consideration. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Warwick, Shelley.
The green line, which is Palmerston North, obviously around 2030 they're doing a huge job, infrastructure job, which everyone pays for on the red line because everyone goes up. Do we get to see what those planned works are before we make a decision, or is that all top secret?
So there is in the consultation document a graph of the capital program, and one of the largest ones in there is the Palmerston North, what's called Nature Calls, is their wastewater treatment plant projected works. Jobs that they've got to do. So that's one of the bigger pieces, is nearly $500 million worth of work. But in that, there's also, we've looked at that, and you know, Kapiti's got some significant water reservoirs sitting out at 2050. So there's a little spike for us. Horowhenua's got some spikes in that capital program. So that's kind of the key spikes and lumps are picked up in the consultation document, just to give a bit of an idea. You know, there's a continuous amount of work that's needed, and then occasionally there's a significant spike, and those are being picked up. And this is obviously one for Palmerston North that stands out.
And so, is the dam in Paraparaumu still on the table for Kapiti, and where does that fit? Because that would be, I assume, a spike.
Just off the end of the graph,
Uh,
surprisingly enough. Just in terms of in terms of the impact of water meters and that deferral of the need for a dam and larger water storage, it does sit in the capital program, but it's
so you
Yeah,
can't
past
see it
that
on
30
that
years.
graph. And it wouldn't be part of the discussions, or how far out do you have discussions about the infrastructure? Because if that's not on the table for these other councils, they can go, well, that wasn't on the table when
30
we
years,
discussed it.
The infrastructure strategy is 30 years. The water service delivery plan is only 10 years. So you're required to provide a plan that shows that 10-year profile. But Morris and Lowe have looked out. The other report that you have access to shows those spikes. But really, there's so much else going on inside of those areas over 30 years. The amount of investment and what might happen in even 10 years' time for some of those larger infrastructure assets that you don't know about. This is really just a relative exercise in terms of asset management planning, investment, and then what does that look like to give you a sense of scale.
Yeah, so
we've just checked on that again.
So this is this is actually the Morris and Lowe report, but it's also going to be contained in the CD. So it does feature there's a combined CapEx picture that just notes the key spikes. Nature Calls being a very large one, and as you say, around 2030. But then our dam's about 2051, and Horowhenua's got Living wastewater treatment plant, several wastewater treatment plants around 2040.
But Palmerston North's treatment plant, there's a $400 million spike relative to a 50 to 100 for some of those others. So that's the quantum in terms of scale difference.
Yeah, so
Joel.
just following on from Councillor Warwick's dam proposal, which clearly I support, you want to bring that discussion forward, just have a couple of years of drought, and we'll be talking about that again. I'm just wondering how much is we are constantly told that Kapiti and Horowhenua are two of the fastest growth areas in the country, and how much of that growth is factored in to these projections, or is it factored in at all? That's question one.
So the base model that's been used is the long-term plan numbers,
Right.
which includes the projected growth and the infrastructure strategy over 30 years. So that will have the key projects in place to facilitate the growth as it's projected in the long-term plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and we also, again, if you have an opportunity to have a look at the Morrison Low report, we had some workshops where we looked at what do we know now that we didn't know necessarily when we were putting the LTP together. And I think that was in the slides at the last briefing. We put another 27 million in over the life of, because we just know that, as did Palmerston North, as did Manawatu. I think Horowhenua was the only one that didn't add. That added some in the out years. So yes, so growth is in there, and we've also had another look at it since 18 months ago, and added some further numbers in there just to make sure.
Okay, and another point, and I know political stability or instability isn't really a primary consideration for you guys, but it should be for us. And I wonder about the ability to pivot in an uncertain political climate. How complex it is in order to be able to pivot depending on which model you've got. So say, for instance, when we were doing our considerations of the three waters based on the legislation that was going ahead with the current government, change of government, everything changed, then it had a significant impact on our rating numbers, etc. And I wonder if locking into something like that model would make it increasingly difficult to pivot when there's a change of government next year, or next year I think it's a change of government, and if they wanted to revert back to say three waters, for instance, how much more difficult would it be to unpick what we're doing if we were part of something like that as opposed to being a CCO?
Sorry, you unpick the internal business unit?
Well, if you... No.
The CCO...
An internal business unit's easy peasy, right?
Yes.
But this, if you go into a consortium of sorts, then that might be... My question is, how much more difficult might that be? It strikes me on the face that it would be a lot more difficult, but I don't know.
We would have invested, or the council would have invested, if it's 12 months from here, if we make that decision, there'll be some level of investment that you would have lost. But I don't think they talk about establishment aligning with the LTP, which is that 27, 28.
Yeah.
So if we haven't done anything other than the theoretical modelling and some of the advanced work around establishing the CCO, then probably not very difficult to revert back, but you would have invested money that you wouldn't be able to recover. Because it's going to take, some of the numbers in the Morrison Low report are, I think, 15 million to establish the CCO. So you would have started down that pathway of investing some of that money, and where you might be in 12 or 18 months, I don't know, but and depending on what that looks like in terms of the election, because you've then got to repeal the legislation, so you've got time.
That's right.
So I'd expect you're probably that far down the path that you would, I guess, you stick to that. If you believe that's the right thing to do anyway, and you're heading down that path, then why would you necessarily unravel it if you've got a mandate to do it, and you can see that it gives you benefit in terms of, I guess unless the government suddenly decided they're going to give us a whole lot of money.
Which would be an excellent idea. We should advocate for that. So we have to make a decision by September, right? So that's our...
By April, there's a slide at the end that talks about May, I think, is the...
Let's wait for the timeline slide, and then we'll have a
So what's the
conversation about
September?
That's when we have to lodge with the DIA the plan, and they then sign it off.
Excellent. Thanks, Nigel. Martin?
Yeah, look, it might be a bit out of whack with this, but I just didn't really. I'm just got a curiosity thing here. We've got quite a bit of debt in relation to our three waters, which I'm picking will be transferred over to the entity, whatever that is, as such, either one. But, you know, the spikes that we see there is work that other councils have yet to do. Chunks of work that we fundamentally potentially already done, hence why we've got the debt. Is that yellow line, mustard line, with regards to, does that pick up the debt retirement or debt reduction as well as that debt costing, so to speak? And how that's relevant to the other councils?
Yeah, so this is revenue.
No, the entity will be doing the debt reduction. The entity will be doing the debt reduction. Has that been factored into the costings that we're seeing there?
No, this just looks at the water part of our business.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is kept the debt reduction on the non-water side, if you like. And I mentioned earlier about the reconciliation work we've got to do to produce the whole of council picture to go into the CD. That will take account of that. But basically what's happened here is they've looked at the water business, they've picked up the opening debt, the figure that was agreed with DIA a couple of years ago. We've stayed consistent to that figure so that everyone's using the same figure, and then they've gone through their modelling methodology, I suppose, of how the pricing would then flow from that, including servicing that amount of debt on the water side.
Okay. All right. No, just curious.
Okay, I think we're good to carry on.
So the other, I guess, one of the other topics that was picked up and discussed at length is the approach to the standing orders, and specifically the Standing Order 916, which originated from concerns around 2011 about water metering and potential future privatisation. So picking up on the conversation, what we've produced in the consultation document is an approach to that, to front foot it, to explain to the community what the challenges are, what the protections are, and how council would intend to deal with those through this process. So it talks about the proposed legislation and in detail the ownership and privatisation protections, and also the requirement to maintain public ownership. It also talks about the Commerce Commission and its role in price regulation and availability of price regulation and monitoring performance. And that the approach that's been put into the consultation document as it stands is that council would consider that standing order when it decides on the future model. So that's something that would come up around the 15th of May when you make a decision as to the direction of which model you wish to pursue. Because if you stay as an in-house model, it doesn't trigger that standing order. If you were looking to go and divest asset, you would then consider what your options are in terms of addressing that standing order, which may be to hold the referendum, acknowledging that there's an estimated $150,000 worth of cost and 4 months of delays to go through that process, and the risk of missing the September deadline, which would be a real risk in terms of timeframes. So this level of information is sitting in that consultation document to explain the options and the challenges that you face in making this decision around the standing orders. Option 2 is to update the standing orders to remove the referendum, but retain the 75% majority, and resolves the timing issue, but also accepts that the consultation feedback is sufficient. So you'll see a bit more about the links that are going to make sure that every ratepayer has an opportunity to have their say about this decision or these options. And option 3 is to remove the standing order altogether, and again acknowledging the new legislation, the protections in there, privatisation, and the opportunity for the community to have its say and for you to get a gauge on what that is. So in the consultation document, as you see it, there will be specific questions on transferring of assets, as if you were having a referendum without officially having a referendum. That it's set up that way. So the touch points are to get to every ratepayer, ask the question up front and front foot it to give you the information. So when you come back in May, you've got that sitting there.
Bernie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this option 1 would be my preference. But I think at the end of the day, don't we owe a duty to the community? We've had this standing order 9.16, and then we've had legal advice, admittedly from the council. So the solicitor's giving us advice, looking at it from a council point of view. But I just think a person on a bus, say 262 bus going to Paraparaumu, you ask them what they should think about this, and they'll say, no, we always understood, notwithstanding what the lawyers say, we always understood that Standing Orders 9.16 provided for a referendum. Give us that option. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it'd be good to go out and hear that. Yeah, it'd be good to go and hear the people on the bus. Yeah, so I don't know if you were at the last briefing, but the discussion was whether to put these options in or whether to take action sooner. So what I'm hearing is it's good that we still have the options open to us. So thanks for that, Bernie. Nigel?
Yeah, is this, and I apologise for not knowing the answer to this, but how does this vary from council's ability to transfer assets, like say housing assets, to a trust? Is this specific? Does water have a different animal?
It's specific to water in the standing orders. It's water assets.
Cool.
Isn't it? Yeah. Yep. Martin.
Yeah, look, when we discussed this with the legal advice, there wasn't much different. Well, it wasn't much different between our consultation process and a referendum, because a referendum is non-binding. And I thought we were going to look at doing wording around that in regards to that, that their consultation is a type of referendum, because we're going to be getting a view from the community in regards to the space, which is what we would be doing for a referendum anyway. Referendum's not binding. So even if we had a referendum after the fact, it's still not binding as such. I mean, the 75% vote, that all that sort of thing retaining. But there was, and I remember the chap who was advising us even coming back and sort of talking to us that could be an option with regards to the similarity of the two, making that a point, so to speak. Because I take on board what Bernie is saying, but we're going to have a lot of people who just don't understand what's going on here, period. And that's but one thing that they will understand is the fact that there was supposed to be a referendum around water and that sort of stuff. So I think it's important that we do a piece in that consultation document that does address that as such. And it's that, I don't think we need to hold a referendum, because we're going through the consultation process. To me, they're one and the same, and that will inform us when we make our vote anyway at the time. But it's all about perception out there in the community as well with regards to things, and I think that's just an important part of.
I think Mike Wakefield, Simpson Gresson briefed us on that. I think, well, from memory, what he was saying is if you can try and present it in a way that's understandable to the community in that sense in the document, but I don't think you could then come back after the consultation and say, look, well, that was our referendum, so therefore we're not going to do another one. Or I guess that's the balance between that, which is what we're trying to do, but maybe we need to make the wording a bit more, because we still, the advice is that if you're going to do that, then you still need to do the referendum if you want to go down that CCO path. You can't use this as a pseudo referendum and say that we've done that.
I think what's there is sufficient, actually. This resolves the timing issue and accepts the consultation feedback as sufficient. Do you think that's not clear, Martin? Do you think that needs expanding on? Yeah, can I have Martin's...
I'll look, option 2, there's no way that I would support, removing the referendum requirement. I just wouldn't do it. It'd be political suicide.
No, what I'm asking is, in terms of communicating that option would be reflecting the legal advice, which was that the consultation was sufficient and to replace a referendum, do you not think that the wording in option 2 makes that clear?
I don't think the wording makes that clear in any of those options.
Well, that's not the wording that's in the application. We've got comms
I guess
sitting in
that's
the
what I'm
room.
referring
We've
to.
got comms sitting in the room, so we'll that I think your point's landed, and we'll work on it.
Yeah. Because we're in a unique situation. We've told that it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario here with regards to things. It might be that if the option that we got for consultation, that the consultation comes back to go for the 4, we might have to go out for a referendum after that. If that's a process, that's a process. That's not what I'm picking is going to be the answer. I'm picking that there's going to be a lot of support with regards to this retaining in-house, and that won't be a requirement. So then it becomes a moot point as such. But I think there just needs to be that a bit of a messaging that makes that a bit clearer. That makes that clearish, because there's always going to be misunderstanding in that space.
Okay, we got that, taking that on
Yep.
board. Thanks, Martin.
Just on the referendum, it's my view that regardless of consultation, there should be a referendum. I think that's what the public have wanted since the time of the water meters, and if it costs money, it costs money. It's part of this. This is a massive cost over the next 30 years, and I just think the cost to the council in terms of trust and confidence is worth more than that. But that wasn't my actual question. And so the referendum would be asking the question whether we stay with the council in-house or we go with the conglomerate. Well, that's my question. What is the question? Should there be a referendum? Because it's not should we change structure, because that's not an option. We've been legislated to change structure. So what is the question?
So I guess firstly, just picking up on Councillor Halliday's point is, and specifically the referendum is a type of consultation. I think that's a subtlety that I appreciate you putting back on the table for us, so we'll take that on board. The question in the standing orders from the advice from Mike Wakefield is that the preliminary arrangements, the consultation requirements in there overlay that requirement for a referendum, but it's sitting in your standing orders. So this presents the options that council could choose, and one of them would be run the referendum or not. And there's a list of about A to G points in terms of what triggers that referendum or what triggers it in the standing orders, divesting of assets, transferring assets. So I think without forming the question today, you'd be wanting to ask specifically whether there was support to transfer assets to another entity. You know, you'd be coming back to what's in those standing orders and what you were proposing to do, and you'd be asking the community that question. And that's the way that it's phrased in the CD. So it's not necessarily about standing up a CCO, it's about transferring the assets to the CCO.
Okay, so if we're going out consultating on two plans, A and B, the referendum would be, do you want to go with A or B?
No.
So I don't understand what the question of the referendum would be.
So I think Martin just answered the question actually. Sorry,
But we legislated to
it's
move the
a little
assets,
bit embedded.
so it's not a question.
The question would be, do you agree that we should transfer the assets to the entity, the proposed entity?
And then 99%
So it
people say
kind
no,
of-
then we
it
do it
kind
because
of
we
repeat-
legislated to.
I think it kind of repeats the consultation, which was the point that the lawyers were making.
Yeah, but there's the expectation in the community that, and a hot expectation that there's a
Yeah.
referendum.
Yeah.
Everyone knows
We're all aware.
it's embedded in the in the water metering systems.
But we're obliged to consult, and we have to have two options.
Yeah, no, I
We're
understand
also
that.
obliged to then follow through with the consultation. So if consultation comes back and says no CCO, IBU is the way to go, then you would not do the referendum. So you wouldn't, well, I mean, you could choose, I don't know why you wouldn't need to do it, because the only reason to do it is if you're divesting your Three Waters assets into another company to manage them other than council. But it's only if
Yes, that was
that's on the table.
only if we go with the 4 we need a referendum.
Yes.
We don't need a referendum if we go for
No,
us.
because you're retaining those
yeah.
assets, you're retaining ownership, you're retaining management.
Yep,
So it's
yep.
only if you go
Yeah,
down
so
that way.
that's the clarification I was after as
Yeah,
well.
and it's not quite clear on the slide. So at
Yep.
that time, I think it should
Yes.
say after that, if the larger entity is preferred,
Then we would need
the
to
options
referendum it.
would include. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we don't know what the community will say, but we would, we are supportive of the in-house. Well, I am.
Well, that,
And I'm,
we're,
I
well,
reflect,
no, we're
I
going out
reflect
with
the
that.
community we live in,
We are,
the
that's,
extreme right wing of it.
Councillor Cooper, we are going out with that as our preferred option.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
understand.
so that's fine.
I'm
It's
actually
nice
not
you
extreme
prefer
right
our
wing, I'll just put
preferred
that on the
option.
record.
Okay, who's next?
I'm a moderate.
Jocelyn.
Yes, so thank you. So, a couple of questions I have in relation to this. What actually is the definition of a referendum? Is it consultation or is it votes? Because I think that is a key. You don't have to look it up, but it's a case of where, I think if we've had advice that consultation is going to be acceptable for a referendum, I would like to double check to make sure that that is actually correct, because I don't know if
No.
it is. So to me, a referendum is actually votes.
No, I think I can explain this. So the advice didn't say that consultation is the same as a referendum. The advice said that the consultation would give us the same indication as a referendum would, which would then justify removing the standing order requiring a referendum.
Yeah, that's a legal advice. I think if
Yeah, that's the legal advice.
Yeah, I
but
think,
obviously there's more nuance to it
yeah,
from
I
our
think
point of view.
if, looking at it from a payer's point of view, I think they see that there are big difference in those two.
It'd be interesting to hear what people say.
Yeah.
We're discussing the consultation document at the moment, not the outcome of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we could stick to that, because we're running over time.
Yeah, so the other point too, it says if we stay in house, a referendum is not a consideration. I understand that. But the question is, to me, and this, I don't know what's in that consultation document, it's about whether it does actually go into a separate business unit or whether it actually stays, the water component stays how it is now, so it's not actually changing to a different entity. And I think that's is an important thing.
It's not a new entity, no.
Right,
It remains within council's
Right,
structure.
okay, that's fine then.
But
Yep.
it'll be ring fenced as a separate, from a funding and operations point of view, it'll be in a separate
Right,
financial
okay.
bubble, if you want to call it that, but
Yeah,
it's still part of
okay.
the organisation.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
Liz.
Look, I think the comms around this is going to be really, really important. And I think there's a bit of an education piece here to let people know that actually 9.16, if this legislation all goes through, is basically redundant. And I think people need to understand that actually the reason why 9.16 was put in there is no longer a good reason. And so because that threat has been taken away, there should really, in theory, be no issue with removing it from standing orders. So I would like to see some really good comms around that. Because that would, I think, save an awful lot of mucking around and hassle if that message can be put through to the community.
Thanks. We've got comms in the room, so they're taking notes.
But we don't have direction from council that is then redundant. I mean, we can certainly highlight the fact that the legislation puts in place that protection to stop privatisation from occurring, but we probably wouldn't go so far as to say, if council is saying you consider it to be redundant and you'd like us to put that in the consultation document, then.
I'm not saying use those words.
Oh.
But yeah, we can highlight the protection.
The appropriate wording as to why we would consider doing that. Yeah. Nigel?
After we thrashed this around last time, I thought we'd kind of settled on option 2. But here's a question. Steffi Heffley's normally she is our genius for this, but 75% of 11 is 8.25. So do we round that up or down? Up, right. So if 3 councillors, for instance, regardless of what decision gets made, if 3 councillors decide to go somewhere different, then you're back to square one again, right? So how does that work? Is that just what it is?
I think that's kind of rhetorical. That's not a question for
Not
today.
entirely rhetorical. It's just in terms of
We're talking about the consultation document that's going out about water, not the 75% decision that would be required once that's made. I think that's a conversation you need to take offline and have with Steffi if you're interested in the details around that.
No, all I was interested in is whether you round it up or down. Makes a big difference.
Up is the answer.
Right.
Cool, let's carry on.
Done.
So there's more flesh on the bone in the consultation document, and what I wanted to walk you through today was how that option was going to be presented.
Yeah, we're going to keep going. Sorry, staff in the room are here for the next presentation. We're just running late, but we need to get through this. Sorry about that.
Okay, so in terms of the approach to consultation itself, again, just set down from the 10th of March, a couple of days after the 6th meeting, with hearings to follow mid-April, 22nd, 23rd of April, if people wish to speak to their submissions. To make it easy for people to access accurate information, and we want people to have their say. So there's a wide range of tools being proposed to get this out to the community, out to ratepayers, a lot of the usual channels, but also using direct email and mail to make sure that the ratepayers do have that information to connect with us and understand it and read through the consultation document, and then provide that feedback that's going to support you in your decision making. We're also looking at digital and radio advertising and webinars and drop-in sessions in the community. And I guess there's some key messages and dates that we'll put together in terms of those drop-in sessions, and love to see some elected members to attend to help those conversations in the community. Understand what's in the document and understand the different implications of the options as presented and the preferred option of the in-house business unit. Just going through the key messages, the first three, just to wrap them up, are really just a reflection of the priorities we put at the front. So again, it impacts everyone in Kapiti: reliable, sustainable water services, financially sustainable, resilient, local priorities, caters for growth. All those priorities are key in the messaging. We want water assets to stay in public ownership and mana whenua aspirations and concepts to have meaningful influence. The other key message that's sitting in there is there'll be increased costs regardless of what model is chosen, and that's to respond to the government's additional regulatory requirements that are coming. And we've already seen Te Mata Arawai and the Commerce Commission going on consultation for their levies to fund their activities. So those increases are coming regardless of which model. The preferred is the in-house business unit, because it has one of the reasons, because it has the lowest average cost over that the next 20 odd years. It does provide you with some opportunities to then look at shared services as another way of economies of scale in the future as well. And just the big message out there is come and have your say. Come and tell us what you think about the different options, about the referendum issue, about what you see as the preferences and why. So it really does pull in a lot of information. There'll be a whole piece of work around analysing that and supporting you with the analytics of the responses through the consultation as well.
We're going to box on to the end. No lights anyway. That's great.
Other work that's still underway, and further due diligence on the CCO option of the 4. We're working with the other 3 councils on consultation and coordinating and sharing that information and knowledge, and making sure that the 4 consultation documents are coordinated and look coherent together. And we're obviously working on the graphic design of the document itself to present back to council on the 6th of March.
Coordination with other councils, that's what we like, isn't it?
Yeah, just on that. So Palmerston North document is actually out now, live for consultation. So we've tried, there has been a bit of a mismatch in terms of timing, so we've tried to align some of the key messages, but there are other drivers for Palmerston to get their information out there in terms of their annual plan. So theirs is out. Hota Whenua's is going to be close to ours, but again, they're pretty close to...
Same with Manatū.
Yeah, Manatū. So it will be us 3 who are pretty close together, but not directly linked. And the other thing that's happening in that space is they're trying to coordinate a councillor collective and session. So there's some dates, I think, being floated at the moment to get everyone together to have a conversation. That will be after, I think that's after the document goes out again in terms of the consultation document. So, and they're working on an agenda for that. So I don't know if you've seen what that looks like, but that'll be coming back to you shortly, I expect, because there's a meeting this afternoon to talk about that. Yeah.
And there are different preferences across the documents.
Yeah, that is one of the, you'll see, and what we've said here is clearly visible. Palmerston North are very clear about why, they talk about their sustainability and ability to fund staying on their own. Horowhenua is exactly the same. They talk about their financial pressure, and they are going to struggle to fund their Three Waters investment as well as their other elements of infrastructure investment. It's really Manawatu and Kapiti that are exceptions in terms of that, and our documents are clear about why we are in that position. So there are some quite key differences, which is the stuff that Martin sort of pointed out, and the key challenge drivers for change.
Great, let's just go through next steps and then we'll take a couple of final questions.
So again, I think I've touched on the next steps, the 6th of March, and bring the document for your full consideration and adoption to go out to consultation period, 10th of March, 13th of April. Hearings back end of April with some feedback analysis coming back to council on the 15th of May is the planned date to make the decision on the water services model. And then from there, there's a piece of work to finish off the water service delivery plan and sign it off and land it with the Department of Internal Affairs on the 3rd of September under their deadlines. Also just putting in there in terms of further briefings perhaps for council and iwi as we work through this process and the due diligence on the 4, if there's new information coming out, perhaps around the price harmonisation that helps support that considerations on the 15th of May, we'll bring those back to you as well.
Great. I've got Nigel and Shelley, and then we'll move on to the
Yeah,
next
just quickly, I'm concerned that there isn't any sort of disingenuousness in terms of discussions with the other primary parties. Horowhenua have already very publicly stated that they would like to be joining with somebody. There seems pretty clearly little appetite here for us to be doing that with anybody. So is that being reflected, or are we just saying, hey, listen, nothing's decided, we're still talking? But it's pretty clear where we're at, I would have thought. And if I'm the Horowhenua
yes.
Council, I'm listening to this.
Before you go on, the answer is yes, we have been in communication with them. Yeah.
Right. And ditto for Palmerston. And
They know where we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, all good. Shelley?
My question is, what if by some craziness our community decides they want us to go with a combined council thing, but one of the other councils, their community says no way, which will probably be Manawatu because they actually are in better shape than the others. What happens then? Because our community's gone, let's join up, and they've gone, nah. It's just all back on the table again.
Well, I think I guess the key decision is if you want to go to a CCO. That you're divesting ownership of your assets, whether it's 2, 3 or 4. 4 advice is that 4 is a better option because you get more customers and you spread the cost across a greater number of customers. Well, you could take it as read. I think that's how Horowhenua are possibly couching theirs, and Palmerston. They know that we are where we are, so I think their document talks about a CCO of some number. Yeah, so Ian might be able to talk. Then you're looking at changing some of those numbers in terms of costs, but the key decision is that the fact that you're transferring your assets out of the council, you're into a CCO, so then the scale of the CCO reflects back in the pricing, but it's really, there's a whole lot of other elements associated with a CCO that would then become relevant.
Will that be clearly put into the consultation document that we would be transferring into a CCO that could have 4 or could have 2?
There's a section in there that explains.
Okay.
There might, exactly that. If someone chose not to, that we need to look at that as a alternative.
Very good. Thank you. We're not as late as I thought we'd be, actually. So we've had a really good thrash around again of some issues that we talked about last time, but I think it's really important that we know where we stand with everything. So thanks for the presentation today, and we'll look forward to next steps. Sean might just have something to add. Hold fire.
We did the harmonisation option. I mean, it's not something you necessarily need to decide, but so maybe we'll put that'll come back in the paper because we don't have another briefing between now and the paper. So So we'll bringing a paper that has some harmonisation options in there, I guess, is the issue, and you need to think about that at that meeting rather than, I was going to suggest you give us a steer, but it's probably not appropriate. But there is a lot of work going on in that space, so that's probably the thing that you'll see come to the front maybe over the next 2 or 3 weeks in terms of some of the other conversations with some of the other councils.
So once we've got that information, then we'll decide how to best manage that. Great. Okay. We'll move straight on to the next presentation. If that's all right. So we've got update on the climate change mitigation sub-strategy. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break.